Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies. And this is Agrippa, Henry Cornelius, from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Agrippa Henry Cornelius. Henry Cornelius Agrippa, who was distinguished as one of the greatest of occult philosophers, was born in the city of Cologne on the 14th of September, 1486. He descended from a noble family and was personally remarkable for his varied talents and extensive genius. In early youth, he acted as the secretary of the Emperor Maximilian, and subsequently served in the army of the same monarch in Italy, where he received the honor of knighthood for his gallant conduct in the field. He also devoted himself to the study of law and physics, and received from the university the degree of doctorate in each of those faculties. Of his literary attainments, he gives an ample description in one of his epistles, in which he says, "I am tolerably well skilled in 8 languages, and so completely a master of 6, that I not only understand and speak them, but can even make an elegant oration or dictate and translate in them. I have also a pretty extensive knowledge in some abstruse studies, and a general acquaintance with the whole circle of sciences." There is some vanity in this, but it must be confessed that there was much learning to excuse the weakness. The temper of Agrippa was variable and irascible, and his disposition bold and independent. Hence his pen was continually given offense, and he was repeatedly engaged in difficulties with his contemporaries, and more especially with the priests, who persecuted him with unrelenting rigor. He traveled much, and visited France, Spain, Italy, and England, sometimes engaging in the delivery of philosophical lectures, sometimes in public employments, and sometimes in the profession of arms. In 1509, he delivered lectures on Roycle's Treaty, seen here, which involved him in a controversy with the Franciscans, and he wrote a work on the excellence of women, which also gave offense to the ecclesiastics, in consequence of which he was obliged to pass over into England, when he wrote a commentary on St. Paul's epistles. He afterwards returned to Cologne, where he delivered lectures on divinity. In 1515, we find him reading lectures on Mercurius Trismegistus, but his ill fortune followed him, and he soon left that city, his departure being, according to his biographer, rather like a flight than a retreat. In 1518, he was at Metz, where he was for some time employed as a syndic and counselor, but having refuted a popular notion that St. Anne had 3 husbands, and having dared to defend an old woman who had been accused of witchcraft, his old enemies, the monks, once more renewed their ill offices, and he was compelled to leave the city of Metz, bequeathing to it as his revenge the character of being the stepmother of all useful learning and virtue. Thence he retired to Cologne in 1520, and to Geneva in 1521, where poverty seems to have pressed hardly upon him. In 1524, he was at Lyons in France, where Francis I bestowed a pension upon him, and appointed him physician to the king's mother, an office, however, which he lost in 1525 in consequence of twice giving offense to his royal mistress. First, because he expressed his dislike at being employed by her in astrological calculations concerning the affairs of France, an employment which he deemed derogatory to a queen's physician. And next, because when he did make these calculations, he interpreted these stars unfavorable for the king's enterprises. Agrippa was not of a temper to brook this dismissal with equanimity, and accordingly we find in one of his letters written at the time, denouncing the Queen Mother for a most atrocious and perfidious sort of Jezebel. In 1528 he repaired to Antwerp, and the year after receiving from Margaret of Austria, governess of the Low Countries, the appointment of historiographer of the Emperor, the history of the government of Charles V was his only contribution to the duties of this office. Soon after Margaret died, and Agrippa again came into collision with his old ecclesiastical persecutors, whose resentment was greatly excited by his treatise on the vanity of the sciences, which he published in 1530, and another work soon after, written on the occult philosophy. His pension was discontinued, and in 1531 he was incarcerated in the prison at Brussels. From this he was, however, soon liberated, and after a few more adventures, he finally retired to Grenoble in France, where he died in 1535. Some writers say in abject poverty and in the public hospital, but this has been denied by Gabriel Naud. The treatise on occult philosophy is the most important of the works of Agrippa, and which has given to him the false reputation of being a hermetic adept and a magician. Thus, Paulus Jovius says that he was always accompanied by a devil in the shape of a black dog, wearing a collar containing some necromantic inscription, and that when he was about to die, he released the dog with an imprecation, after which the animal fled into the river Saône, into which he leaped, and was never heard of more. Martin Del Rio says that when Agrippa traveled, he used to pay his score at the inns in money which at the time appeared to be good, but in a few days turned out to be pieces of horn or shell. A tale which reminds us of one of these stories in the Arabian Nights. The same author retells another apocryphal anecdote about a student who, during Agrippa's temporary absence, was strangled in the magician's library by an irate demon, and into whose dead body Agrippa, on his return, caused the devil to enter and walk several times across the public square at Louvain, and finally to drop dead, whereby the death appeared to be a natural one, and suspicion was thus averted from Agrippa. The truth is, however, that the treatise on occult philosophy was of so abstruse and mystical a character that the author found it necessary to write a key to it, which he reserved for his most intimate friends, and in which he explained its esoteric meaning. Masonic historians have very generally attempted to connect Agrippa with that institution, or at least with cognate mystical societies. Thus Gadicki says, a society for the cultivation of the secret sciences, which he founded at Paris, and which extended through Germany, England, France, and Italy, was the first ever established by a learned man, and was the pattern and parent of all subsequent similar societies. Lenning also states that it is reported that Agrippa established in Paris a secret society for the practice of the abstruse sciences, which became the basis of the many mystical associations which have been since originated. But a writer in the Monthly Review, London, Volume 25, 1798, page 304, is still more explicit on this subject. His language is as follows. In the year 1510, Henry Cornelius Agrippa came to London, and, as appears by his correspondence, he found a secret society for alchemical purposes, similar to one which he had previously instituted at Paris, in concert with Landolfo, Brixianix, Xanthus, and other students at that university. The members of these societies did agree on private signs of recognition, and they founded, in various parts of Europe, corresponding association for the persecution of the occult sciences. This practice of initiation, or secret incorporation, thus and then first introduced, has been handed down to our own times, and hence apparently the mysterious Eleusinian confederacies now known as the Lodges of Freemasonry. In 1856 there was published in London a life of Cornelius Agrippa, von Nettesheim, Doctor and Knight, commonly known as a magician, by Henry Morley. This is a curious and trustworthy work, and contains a good summary of Agrippa, and interesting accounts of the time in which he lived, as Agrippa has, whether justly or not, been thrown into a connection with Freemasonry. A brief view of his occult philosophy may not be uninteresting, but it must be always bore in mind that this philosophy was what he called occulta philosophia, occult hidden, containing, like the science of the alchemist, more in its inmost recesses than appears on its surface, and that he himself, aware of its esoteric character, had written a key by which his intimate friends might be able to interpret its concealed meaning and enjoy its fruits. Ragan gives a resume of the doctrines from which the following is condensed. Agrippa said that there were three worlds: the elementary, the celestial, and the intellectual, each subordinate to the one above it. It is possible to pass from the knowledge of one world to that of another, and even to the archetype itself. It is said this scale of ascent that constitutes what is called magism, a profound contemplation, embracing nature, quality, substance, virtues, similitudes, differences, the art of uniting, separating, and compounding. In short, the entire operations of the universe. It is a sacred art which must not be divulged, and to whose reality and certainty the universal connection of all things testifies. There are abstruse doctrines of the elements of which each performed a particular function. Fire, isolated from all matter, manifest upon it, however, its presence and action. Earth is the support of the elements and the reservoir of the celestial influences. Water is the germ of all animals, and air is a vital spirit which penetrates all beings and gives them consistency and life. There is a sublime, secret, and necessary cause which leads to truth. The world, the heavens, and the stars have souls which are in affinity with our own. The world lives and has its organs and its senses. This is the macrocosms. Implications are of efficacy in attaching themselves to beings and in modifying them. Names have a potential quality. Magic has its language, which language is an image of signatures, and hence the effect of invocations, evocations, adjurations, conjurations, and other formula. Numbers are the first cause of the connection of things. To each number is attached a peculiar property. Thus, unity is the beginning and end of all things, but has no beginning nor end itself. God is the nomad. The binary is a bad number. The ternary is the soul of the world. The quaternary is the basis of all numbers. The quinary is a powerful number. It is efficacious against poisons and evil spirits. The decade or denary is the completion of all things. The intelligence of God is incorruptible, eternal, present everywhere, influencing everything. The human spirit is corporeal, but its substance is very subtle and readily unites with it the universal spirit, the soul of the world, which is in us. This is some part of the occult philosophy of Agrippa, who, however, has said, in reference to abstruse theories, almost if not altogether unintelligible like these, that all that the books undertake to teach on the subjects of magic, astrology, and alchemy are false and deceptive, if they are understood in the letter. But to appreciate them, to draw any good out of them, we must seek the mystic sense in which they are enveloped, a doctrine which applies to Freemasonry as well as to the Hermetic philosophy, and the truth of which is now universally admitted by the learned. The Freemason who expects to find in the abstruse writings of Agrippa anything directly referring to his own institution will be greatly disappointed. But if he looks in the pages of that profound thinker for lessons of philosophy and ethics, which have a common origin with those that are taught in the Masonic system, his labor will not have been in vain, and he will be disposed to place the wise Cornelius in the same category with Pythagoras and many other philosophers of the olden time, who the craft have delighted to call their ancient brethren, because without being Freemasons in outward form and ceremony, they have always taught true Masonic doctrine. It is not, perhaps, inappropriate to give to such unaffiliated teachers of the true Masonic doctrine the title of uninitiated Freemasons. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.